Hi, and welcome to the Fantastic Comic Fan Podcast, where we're talking to the legendary Jim Zub.
I don't know about legendary, but you're talking to me, so we'll take it from there.
Hey, if you're not legendary now, you're on the way.
Thank you.
You may know Jim from his, again, legendary writing on Titan Comics' Conan the Barbarian series, or his creator owned independent work on Wayward or Skull Kickers, or maybe some of his amazing work on Avengers. But Jim, as a first time guest, I want to know your origin story. What got you into comics and what made you a fan?
I started reading comics, obviously, like a lot of people when I was a kid, and beyond like comic strips like Garfield or whatever, Hagar the Horrible or something, actual comic books, probably the first ones that I started actively looking for collecting were the G.I. Joe ones that Marvel was putting out as tie-ins for the toys and the cartoon. And then soon after that, maybe in and around that, it's always hard to tell at that age, I started collecting Spider-Man. And that really unlocked the Marvel universe for me. My older brother is my kind of proto nerd. He's 4 years older than me. And he got me into comic books and video games and tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and sci-fi and fantasy and just all those things around the same time. And we were collecting together. We were excited and feeding off of each other's energy and just pumped to get into comics around that time.
Not that you need any kind of introduction, but can you tell the fans a little about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a Canadian comic book writer and artist and art instructor. I grew up in Oshawa, Ontario, about an hour east of Toronto. And now I write full time for a living, but I've been in all kinds of different capacities. So I've worked as an artist and an animator. I've been a teacher, almost every kind of part of the production process. So I've been a colorist and a letterer. I've been an editor and an artist and a writer. So a little bit of everything, but now I'm known best and for the longest period of time as a comic book writer. And I've been doing that steadily. It depends on how you measure it. Professionally since around 2006, 2007, but I got on most people's radar around 2010 or 2011 with a book called Skull Kickers that I put together. It was a creator-owned sword and sorcery action comedy, and that would lead to all kinds of other work. Eventually, I would do work at Dynamite and IDW, DC Comics, and Marvel. Pretty much any major publisher in North America, I've done work for them at some point, and obviously a lot of creator-owned books at Image as well.
Mhm. Now, did you always want to work in comics?
When I was growing up, it was a different era. This is pre-internet, and a lot of times you would read about what they called in Marvel the bullpen. So people working in New York City, they would get their assignments, they would drop off artwork at the office. And so the idea of working for Marvel or DC meant being in New York City and being an American. I knew there were some independent comics or there were like brilliant British people who were working in comics as part of the British
Mhm.
invasion in the 80s, but I never really envisioned myself becoming one of them. It seemed impossible to be one of the few people who are in those little credit boxes at the front of a comic. And so I ended up working in animation first. That was my creative outlet before before I got into comics as professionally speaking. Because on a movie, an animated feature or a TV show, I saw hundreds of names scrolling by and I was like, "Oh, I could probably be one of those people. I could have a creative job and do something fun, but not necessarily comics." And comics happened at first a bit by accident, and then once I realized it was even a possibility, I grabbed hold of it with both hands and tried to make the most of it.
That's really awesome. What animated features have you worked on? Sorry.
I haven't worked on feature stuff. I was working in TV animation here in Canada.
Mhm.
So a lot of different Canadian cartoons that were coming out. There were these shows like this show called King and another one called Toad Patrol and like Babar the Elephant and stuff like that. It was all
Oh, I've
kind of
seen
kids
that.
cartoon stuff that were being produced here in Canada. I worked on a studio that was doing, there was the main studio that was doing the work, and then there were spill studios where they would be picking up other freelance work where they could. I worked for a couple different startup studios, and yeah, I love animation and I loved it then, but I realized very quickly that you were just, a lot of times you were the cog in the machine, and actually
Mhm.
getting any kind of creative control over a production meant you were going to have to toil away for years and years if you even had that opportunity. And very quickly after I started working in animation, I was looking for other creative outlets. And I was lucky that there was this transformation happening with the internet. And I saw people posting comics online And so some of the web comics that I was reading in the late 90s and early 2000s inspired me to want to make my own comics. And so while I was working in animation in the evenings, I started making my own web comic, hand coded my first web page, and started posting stuff up online. The World Wide Web is still pretty new for people, and found a kind of a community of other creators and artists who were making stuff all over the world. And it really inspired me to want to get to know more about the industry, get to meet more of those people, and then eventually make this my whole career.
How did you break into comics?
I had multiple kind of phases. Like I said, I was doing the webcomic thing for a few years, but it was a different time. Like on my website, I had my email address right there on the front page.
Mhm.
And I was taking a break for Christmas, the holidays around, this was 2001. And I got an email out of the blue from Scott McCloud, the guy who wrote Understanding Comics. He was doing more and more stuff online, and he was really supportive of artists who were getting their start on the internet in that time. And he liked what I was doing and reached out and started communicating with me. He wanted people to be at major conventions like San Diego to talk about it. So he ended up introducing me to other webcomic artists. They convinced me to make my way to San Diego Comic-Con in 2002. And that was the first time I met a large group of comic book creators, obviously working professionals doing superhero stuff, but all kinds of indie work as well. And that it opened up my eyes to a lot more of the possibilities. But I was doing a lot of other freelance creative work. It would take years for me to really transition to doing comics regularly. I was doing just short stories and anthologies. I was finishing up my web comic and eventually publishing it. And wherever possible, the studio, we would do comic book projects for
Mhm.
clients. And if they didn't have a writer, I would try and throw myself into it so that I could get more experience writing. And then around 2009, one of the artists that I worked with, he had the opportunity to work on, we did a couple short stories for Pop Gun. Eric Larson, who was publisher at Image at the time, really liked them and asked us if we wanted to make our idea into a full series. And over the course of about a year, and then finding a different art team, I would launch that as Skull Kickers. And that was the first time that I felt like I was putting out a regular book and I was getting known for my writing. And so, even though I'd done comic work off and on, like I said, since 2004, 2005, 2010 was really a milestone year for me. And you can see that steady development and improvement and the regularity that comes with it that really transformed my career at that point.
That's amazing. And just for those listening that may be
Mhm.
less familiar with Skull Kickers than your more recent work on
Sure.
Conan, do you want to give us just a back of the book blurb? Tell us what it's about.
Yeah, Skull Kickers, just actually 2 weeks ago, the original stories are back in print. Oni Press just did a series of compact editions. The first one came out this month, volume two, which contains volume two and three of the, or sorry, volume three and four of the original Image run, comes out next month in March. And then in April, volume three, which will have the original five, six, comes out. So those are going to be back in print, a sword and sorcery comic. It's essentially like Deadpool meets Dungeons and Dragons. It's two monster hunting idiot mercenaries who get themselves in deep trouble and have to kill their way out. It's very sarcastic, very ridiculous, and genre busting all the way through. It was meant to emulate playing Dungeons and Dragons when I'm like 8 or 9 years old with my brother and just us being absolute goofballs and causing trouble at the table. And so that's really what it was all about. It's a fun book, it's an action-packed book, it's ridiculous. And the further it goes on, the more tropes it bulldozes its way through.
That, that's amazing. Can't recommend it enough to anyone listening.
Oh,
And that actually
thanks.
brings us to another question I was really curious
Hmm.
about. Previous to working on IDW's Dungeons and Dragons comics, I was going to ask
Yeah.
what your experience was with D&D, but clearly you have been playing for a long time. How did
Yeah, I
your
could tell you more.
experience? Yes.
D&D is absolutely formative to my
Mhm.
creative career, honestly. Without Dungeons and Dragons, I don't think I would be here as a writer because it unlocked a desire to make stories instead of just reading them or watching them. And I had no idea at the time, but it was really it just unlocked that desire to be creative and to make stuff. And the instant feedback that I got from an audience, my older brother, my cousins, my friends at the table, we would be coming up with these characters and these stories, these spontaneous ideas. And when they laughed and when they were engaged, I just felt this incredible rush. And it made me want to tell stories for the rest of my life. I ended up doing a TED talk all about this called Raised by Dragons that very much talks about how D&D taught me about working in a team and being creative and collaborative and made me the person that I am today. And yeah, getting to work on D&D officially is mind bending when I think about it too much in the best way possible. It's something that I never ever imagined when I was growing up, when I started working in the creative field, when I started making my own comics, that still felt like one of those kind of out of reach dreams. And now I've been doing professional Dungeons and Dragons stuff for more than 10 years. And they released this book called Legends and Lore, which is the modern history of Dungeons and Dragons. And I have a weird little badge of honor in that in the index, I'm the only person listed under Z. So my last name, it's cool.
It sounds like a real dream come true moment.
Absolutely.
Dungeons and Dragons is something I really wish I'd gotten into when I was younger.
Play now? Have you
Uh,
had a chance to try it?
I've always wanted to, but just never been something I've gotten into. I have a character sheet somewhere in my room.
I hope you give it a shot at some point, or one of the other. There's tons of different tabletop role playing games, all
Mhm,
different genres. There's superhero ones and sci-fi ones,
mhm,
cyberpunk and steampunk, and you name it. There's all kinds of different things you can do in terms of role playing games. It's a really fun way to create memories with your friends. It's a really great creative exercise to just bounce ideas off people and spontaneously build. And I wouldn't say it's like a necessarily a normal story. You're not trying to worry about the three act play or like
mhm,
absolute classic pacing. It's more about improv and
mhm.
entertainment in the moment, but it's still a really cool exercise and a really fun way to flex your creative muscles.
That's really awesome. It's going to have to be one of those things I do before I die.
Definitely. And there's no wrong age for it. I know people who started when they were 7 or 8 years old, and I know people who started when they were basically retirees in their 60s. So there's no wrong time to jump in.
Thank you for sharing. Really, thank you.
No
To
problem.
pivot to another of your amazing works, I have to talk about Wayward because I
Sure.
remember picking up a copy of, I think it was a reprint of the first issue
Cool.
when I was around 12 at Fan Expo in Toronto. It's such a unique comic. I still remember reading it for the first time. How did you and Stephen Cummings come up with it? What was the development and pitching process like?
That's a good question. So Steven was another artist that I was working with at the Udon studio, and he's just an amazing talent, and he's such a skilled dude. He's so great. And we really got along well. I was project managing at the Udon studio at that point. So we would work on all kinds of different projects together. And we had put together, there was this sort of anthology series that we did at Udon called Vent. It was a bunch of our creative ideas that we were throwing out there. Sometimes it was a short story, sometimes it was a pinup, just character design, things that we wanted to get to on our own creative concepts that we wanted to eventually work on. And Steven did this pinup, which is actually the cover of Wayward #1. It's that girl standing at the top of the
Mhm,
stairs. This teenager, she seems so slight, but she's powerful,
mhm.
and there's cats all around her and they all have golden eyes. And I just thought it looked so cool. And I said, man, what is this all about? And he goes, I don't know. I just want to do some kind of cool Japanese ghost story. And I was like, oh my God, I would love to see that. And years later, I had Skull Kickers. It had come out, it had done relatively well. I was eager to want to make more creator owned comics. I wanted to put more of my ideas out there. And I had this idea rolling in the back of my head about sort of fantasy and the supernatural in the modern world. But most of my ideas were focused on Eurocentric, classic Germanic or British kind of fantasy and creatures and fairy folk and all that kind of stuff. And then I started talking to Steven about different ideas. And I remembered he had that Japanese ghost story idea. And he was saying he wanted to do something with yokai and Japanese mythology. And I thought, there's no reason why I have to take that story and make it classic European style fantasy. And I started doing deep dive kind of research on yokai and the supernatural in Japan. And I thought this is going to be pretty overwhelming for a reader if they don't know anything about the country and they don't know anything about those myths. So if I make the main character going to Japan and discovering this stuff, now she's the touchstone for knowledge that the reader's getting at the same time. So I'm getting educated about it. She's getting educated about it. The reader's getting educated about it. But it doesn't feel just like an info dump. It's a natural progression as part of the entertainment and as part of the story that we're building. And that was the germination of it. Steven started sketching up different ideas. We brainstormed a bunch of different, it was almost like we wanted these to be the X-Men or New Mutants, like young kids in Tokyo who were going to come across their own supernatural powers, but we didn't want them to be like classic superhero powers, like fire and flying or super strength. We wanted them to have this kind of supernatural Japanese flair to them. And that was a really fun thing to do. And the more we developed it, the more the core kind of story and that idea of the old supernatural in Japan fighting against this new generation that was being formed in real time came together. And it was one of the tightest pitches I think I've written, especially for a creator-owned book. And I sent it out to a bunch of different publishers. And Steven's amazing piece of key art, that pinup that was the first issue cover, and it grabbed so much attention. We had four different publishers that were interested in it, and we decided to go with Image. And it was a really good timing. And we were able to do 30 issues, six trade paperbacks. It was in multiple languages. We had a really loyal readership on it, and it changed both my career and Steven's because of it.
That's amazing. I feel like I say the same thing at the end of each of these, but your answers are
It's all
just.
good.
If we could pivot to your more recent work on the
Sure.
Cimmerian,
Yeah.
issue number 28 of Conan for Titan Comics is currently out across the land. The series
Mhm.
has been a smash success, garnering acclaim from both critics and fans alike. What's it been like writing the adventures of comics' most savage barbarian?
He's older than
Mhm.
Superman by 6 years and is the bedrock of the sword and sorcery genre. He's arguably the most famous fantasy character on Earth. You can be in almost any country, say the word Conan the Barbarian, and everyone knows who you're talking about. The character's generational, started in the 30s in the pulps, made his way into comics by the 70s, and Conan number one is considered by many the start of the Bronze Age of comics. It's transformational stuff. And again, one of those properties, one of those characters, one of those worlds that I never ever imagined I would get the chance to be a part of. I wrote my first Conan story in 2015. That was at Dark Horse, co-written with Gail Simone. We did the first crossover between Conan and Red Sonja in 16 years, I think. And it was a ton of fun, and I thought that would be my only chance to ever write Conan. Then the character came back to Marvel in 2018, and I was doing a pile of stuff at Marvel, so I got to do some writing for Conan there, carried through to taking over the main monthly series for a little while in 2020. And then when Marvel wrapped up the license, once again, I thought that would be my only chance to ever write the character. But the people who own Conan, the rights holders, they really liked what I was doing. They were excited and wanted to see if I had more ideas. And so they reached out and asked me if I would do a competitive pitch. So there were multiple writers who were pitching to take over the relaunch at Titan. And I think there were 9 writers who pitched to take over the relaunch. And somehow I managed to keep hold of that diamond. We relaunched the series in August 2023. And after a year, everyone was really happy with it. The sales had been amazing. And they asked if I would stay on long term. So I'm signed on the series till issue 50 right now. So I'll be on Conan till at least the end of 2027, which is amazing. It just gives me a runway to build an amazing, big mythic story and know that we're going to get to the end and pay it off in the way that we plan, which in modern comics right now is rarer than it should be.
Absolutely agree on that. Back on your comment about Conan number one, I have to point it out behind your shoulder there. That's terrific.
Yeah, so I actually finally got a copy. This isn't a reprint. That's one of the originals. I was at MegaCon in Orlando last summer, and I've been wanting to get one for quite some time. And I saw a retailer there. He had one on display, and we had a great chat. And I was wondering about whether I was going to pick it up. And he's, man, if you'd have picked this up like a year or two ago, it would have been so much cheaper. But Conan's super hot again. And then he glanced down at my badge, which had my name on it, and he goes, "Oh, and it's all your fault." Fans are everywhere, man, and they're generational. It's a distinct honor. I mean that in all
Mhm.
seriousness. Guys old enough to be my grandfather coming over and chatting with me and telling me about their memories growing up reading Conan and enjoying the comics, the original novels, the
Mhm.
movies, the video games, everything. And those hearty handshakes and their memories, literally fathers bringing their sons or daughters and saying, "Hey, this is one of my favorite things." I was at Vancouver Fan Expo last weekend, and you'd see these families come by, and the kids are into anime and or superheroes and stuff like that. And usually the dad's whatever, he's got the cart and he's vaguely paying attention, but Conan always grabs his eye. He's coming by and he goes, "Wait, I used to collect Conan." And you could see the whole family just turns like, "Dad loves this thing. Let's go." It was just like it just kept happening over and over again. And it's been happening since I took over the new series. It's now been almost, we're on year three, which is just bonkers to me that I get to be associated with it, that I get to build these new stories for this legendary character, and that so many good memories people have wrapped up in the character that they feel I'm doing it justice. It means the world to me.
Absolutely. And I have to agree with Conan being generational. My dad introduced me to it. He showed me the movie of Arnold when I was a kid, and
Yeah,
I fell in love.
perfect.
And that brought me to the comics, and that eventually brought me to the books.
The original stories are still incredibly potent. Most of them are short stories. They were published in a
Mhm.
magazine called Weird Tales magazine, and there's no fat on them. Like you've got to get right into the entertainment right from the jump. They're atmospheric, they're lyrical, they're powerful. Howard writes some of the most potent prose I've ever read. It's energetic and intense. It just summons the most amazing visuals in your mind as you're reading it.
Again, I can't wholeheartedly agree enough. I've got my copy of the Complete Chronicles of
Oh,
Conan
sweet.
behind,
Yeah, I know that one as well.
uh,
That's great.
which I bought to use for basically a book report for one of my college classes. So I got to write
Cool.
basically a book report on Robert E. Howard for class, which was just so
Amazing.
fun. My
Right?
prof was not super impressed, but I had fun.
Amazing. Great.
Yeah. Oh, you should have seen the look on her face. But moving on, we already talked about it a little bit, but from
Sure.
books like Wayward or
Mhm.
your work on the Dungeons and Dragons comics, you're clearly more than capable of writing magical and mystical stories. Are there any lessons you learned while writing the Dungeons and Dragons comics or Wayward that you've carried on into Conan?
I think there's truisms of storytelling in general. I think a lot of people make the mistake that magic or superpowers or the fantastic means that there are no rules, but you need
Mhm.
to establish those baselines, like how things work and why they work, and then you have to hold the world and the characters to it. Just because Conan lives in a fantasy world, yes, magic spells happen and he can be transported to fantastic places. But if he gets hit, whatever, with a giant boulder, you would expect it would kill him. You know what I mean? You can't just wave it away and say, magic fixed it, magic changed it. There have to be stakes, there has to be still emotional intensity. You still want all the same levers that you need in any kind of fiction or narrative to work. You just have more options at your disposal. But you also have to establish very cleanly this is what this magic can do in the context of the story. This is what this magical artifact is capable of. Or you can always make things harder on the heroes, but you can't make it spontaneously easier thanks to magic and the
Mhm.
supernatural. Otherwise, it feels like a cheat. The audience feels like you're getting out too easy. And so, in many ways, my job is to turn the thumb screws as hard as I can on these characters and make things that the magic makes their lives more difficult. It doesn't solve all their problems.
That's amazing.
I thought it
You
was quite
said,
good.
yeah, I had no real baseline of Dungeons and Dragons knowledge when I went in to watch it, and I watched it with a
Mhm.
friend of mine who does know Dungeons and Dragons, and he was upset by some of the changes they made. I thought it was just like a pretty fun fantasy movie, but
I go into those, I can nitpick, and I usually do, especially when it comes to the lore and to the specifics. But as a film, it was really entertaining. The characters were
Mhm.
good. My parents saw it and they enjoyed it, which to me is okay. They're not nerdy in the slightest. They don't even do genre films half the time. And so the fact they could follow along, they knew exactly what was at stake, they knew who was doing what and why. I'm like, okay, that works. Like for general audience entertainment, that's about as good as it's going to get with something so complicated and lore heavy.
Absolutely. Sorry, I just brought it up because
No,
I
no
always
worries.
think of that line where they're like, "Oh, just fix it with
Yeah.
magic." I thought it was a great running joke.
Yeah, totally. And what was great was it was almost always worse for it. The magic made things harder, put
Mhm.
more complexity in their way. It became a challenge to overcome rather than a solution to all their problems.
Again, back to Conan,
Hmm.
the barbarian himself. He's had so many interpretations and iterations over the years. You have the original Robert E. Howard stories from Weird Tales. You have the Roy Thomas, Barry Windsor Smith, John Buscema runs, the Dark Horse years, and of course the movies with the amazing Arnold. Including or excluding these, what do you consider your primary influence when writing Conan?
The reality is, it's got to be Howard. Like that. Roy Thomas set the template in terms of how the
Mhm.
comics are built, and some of the smart things he did, for example, like there are almost no sound effects in a Conan comic, and you probably didn't even notice it while you were reading them, because instead of slash or stab or ugh and stuff like that, there's always this poetry, there's always this lyricism during the combat or during moments of sweeping big action. And that atmospheric, poetic kind of air feels like the sort of narration that Howard was doing in the original prose stories. And so I very much take inspiration from that. I read and I reread not just Conan stories, but other Robert E. Howard writing. He wrote over 200 short stories. Only about 21 of them were Conan stories. And he wrote horror, he wrote noir and detective stories and cowboy stories and boxing tales. And seeing how he uses his cadence, how he chooses his words, the rhythm of those sentences, and the way he's able to build up atmosphere and action is always inspiring to me. And it makes me want to be more careful and more focused and make sure that every sentence and bit of narration that I'm doing isn't a copy of what he does, but carries on kind of those traditions. The original Howard stuff by far, obviously the Roy Thomas stuff. I love the Kurt Busiek run at Dark Horse. Tim Truman did some amazing issues at Dark Horse as well. Just about there's a new writer named John C. Hawking. He did an amazing story in the 90s that has now been reprinted. If you pick up this Conan novel called City of the Dead, it's actually two novels in one. It's the original novel he did in the 90s, and then it's the sequel to it all in one brand new book. And it's some of the best modern Conan writing. It's got that pulpy flair, it's got that intensity. John really understands Howard's rhythm in writing, but is still his own author. And that's something I aspire to be as well.
On the subject of the legend himself, Robert E. Howard, do you
Yeah.
think you could possibly name your favorite Conan story by Howard? Is it possible?
Uh,
Do you have to say?
my favorite Conan story is probably Red Nails, which is the last one
Mhm.
that he wrote, the last one that they published. It's the most intense in terms of action. It's got some of the most evocative moments of atmosphere and intensity. It is pure pulp and adventure. You can see exactly why Dungeons and Dragons draws so much inspiration from Howard's writing, because it is like a dungeon delve and exploration. There's treasures and magic and danger and monsters. There's other ones obviously that stand out. Queen of the Black Coast, Tower of the Elephant. These are the ones that everyone always kind of says
Mhm.
because they're the foundation of the fantasy genre for good reason. I really like Frost Giant's Daughter, Beyond the Black River. Like those are probably the strongest prose stories that Howard put together of Conan, and they've got some of the most evocative and amazing imagery that has ever been done in the sword and sorcery genre.
That's really awesome. Could you name a favorite non-Howard Conan story? Sorry, that's such a
Huh.
niche question. I'm just curious myself.
No, it's probably either City of the Dead by John C. Hawking or Road of Kings. Oh, I forget the author's name off the top of my head. Both of them are quite good. There have been a lot of pretty crappy ones over the years, unfortunately, and a lot of people who they have a very generic kind of stereotype version of who they think Conan is.
Mhm.
He's just like a big lumbering monster with a sword, and he gets the
Mhm.
girl and he gets the treasure. And it's like the character the reason why he stuck around is because he's a lot deeper and more interesting than that. He's more philosophical. The big theme of Conan the Barbarian across all the Howard stories is this concept that we call civilization versus savagery. And the idea that Conan's the outlander and he's the barbarian entering these civilized lands or interacting with these civilized people. Civilized, I use the hanging air quotes there. But the reality is that the politicians and the religious leaders, almost all of them are manipulators, and they'll tell you one thing, but they're duplicitous and they'll stab you in the back. They use their civilization and their rules and their laws and their grand technology to control people and to empower themselves and oppress others. And so the barbarian, the one that they consider savage and an outlander and a monster, he's honor bound. If he tells you, don't cross this line, he means it and he'll kill you in an instant. But if he says he'll fight by your side, he'll do so till his dying breath. And so, in that kind of a world and in these kinds of moral quandaries, who is truly civilized and who is truly savage? And it's that kind of philosophical bent that's at the heart of the stories, along with Howard's lyricism and his thoughtful, careful building of prose, that I think makes those stories last. There were dozens and dozens of authors who did stuff for Weird Tales, and really Clark Ashton Smith and Howard Phillips Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard are the three that stand out because of
Mhm.
the consistency and the quality and the intensity of their ideas.
I've read a lot of Lovecraft as well. Those stories terrify me still.
Yeah, they're just so bizarre. A Howard story is not that different from a Lovecraft story. They both wrote a lot of horror. They both wrote, Robert E. Howard wrote some stories that are part of the Cthulhu mythos as well. And what's fascinating is seeing how they treat the subject matter. H.P. Lovecraft character will find the horror beyond imagination and it'll destroy them. It'll wreck their mind and they'll be a
Mhm.
gibbering, catatonic fool at the end of the story. And in a Robert E. Howard story, they fight. They fight to their dying breath. They're screaming.
Mhm.
They will lose against this cosmic entity, these horrific monsters and spirits, but they always fight till the end. And that's the
Mhm.
difference between the two. It's not that in the horror story who's going to win, because no one wins, you always die, but it's what you do on the way down.
Interesting way to look at the difference between Lovecraft and Howard and all those weird tales writers. I do have to say I love when Howard stories dip into the Cthulhu mythos.
Oh,
Worms
big
of the
time.
Earth with Bran
Yeah, Worms the
McMorn.
Earth is awesome. Yeah, Bran McMorn's one of the better characters. I like the James Allison tales. I like Kierwin and Conrad. Obviously, Solomon Kane. Kull the Conqueror is stands out. He's a much more introspective. He's a character. Yeah, absolutely. Howard's got a lot of really cool characters, and one of the things that's been really exciting is not just writing Conan, but once a year we have an event miniseries. So every fall, I'm writing this 4-issue miniseries and a tie-in issue of Savage Conan, our anthology series, that ties in other Howard characters. So a couple years ago, we did Battle of the Blackstone, and you have Conan, but you also have Solomon Kane and Kieran and Conrad. This adventure called El Barak and Dark Agnes, and all these cool characters coming together to fight a greater kind of evil. Then last year, we did Scourge of the Serpent, and that is three parallel stories with Conan and Kirwan all going on these separate pulp style tales that all tie into kind of Set the Great Serpent and the bigger mythic patterns that are happening behind all the stories. Then this year, I'm already building out in Free Comic Day. We're going to have our prelude. And then this fall, we're going to have the miniseries for what's called Tides of the Tyrant King. So it's the return of Thulsa Doom, the world's original greatest necromancer, and the grand plan that he has for all of reality. And so Conan's going to get himself wrapped up in all of that, but there will be other tie ins to Howard stories as well.
That's amazing. I'm absolutely looking forward to that. I was just
Cool.
rereading Scribe of the Serpent earlier today just to get in the right headspace for this call and just, oh, it's so fun. I
Thanks, man.
love,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
sorry,
it's
I'm
a joy to
fanboying really
build
hard here,
this
but I love
stuff.
it.
It's really fun to be able to work on this stuff and to be able to bring readers not just new Conan stories, but to also, if I do my job well and our team is so amazing, all the artists I get to work with, editorial and colorists and letterers, and everyone involved in the team is just phenomenal. But if we do our job properly, we're hopefully creating a new generation of readers who appreciate not just the original Howard source material, but all the characters in that kind of incredible
Mhm.
cast of that the library that he created in his lifetime and across multiple genres, but they all feel pulpy and they all feel intense and there's always a
Mhm.
supernatural flair to it.
Couldn't agree more. Books like Scratch of the Serpent draw a bigger audience to Cull because he might actually be my favorite Howard character I discovered
Okay.
before I discovered Conan.
Oh
I
yeah.
love Cull.
Cal is just like the emo king, man. He's
Hmm.
so deep and dark and introspective and
Hmm.
cynical and worried about what is even reality. And so he
Hmm.
can there's some really amazing lyrical kind of surreal things that
Hmm.
he goes through in terms of his observations about life and reality and what it all means.
And he's so brooding. It
Yes,
carries over even into the Roy Thomas stories. I think
absolutely.
my favorite Cull moment has got to be It's one issue of the Roy Thomas stories where he watches a city like sink into the ocean, and the line is just, he felt nothing but a sense of shuddering premonition.
Yeah, that's definitely Call. And a lot of times, because the character shares an origin with Conan, the first Conan story is actually a rewritten Call
Hmm.
tale. There is a lot of the shared DNA there, but the two characters were
Hmm.
able to separate themselves in terms of their
Hmm.
attitude and how they approach stuff. And getting to write both of them, you appreciate those nuances a lot more.
I have to imagine. Number 29 of Conan
Yep.
comes out this Wednesday, February 25th. Can you tell
Yeah,
us what's next for Conan the Barbarian? I know
sure.
this issue kickstarts a new arc. I was reading your Substack page on it earlier today on how it's very weird tales inspired. But what's next for the Barbarian?
So, like the original Weird Tales, we don't just go in chronological order. We're
Mhm.
jumping around the timeline all the time. So, we just finished a story arc called The Conquering Crown that shows how Conan becomes the king of Aquilonia. Now we're rolling that timeline back earlier. Conan has run afoul of this cult of the Black Stone, this evil mythical material, which is tied in with Thulsa Doom and the Necromancer
Mhm.
and all kinds of funky stuff. And so that cult has hired an assassin to track Conan down, this supernaturally empowered character. He's a brand new villain that Doug Braithwaite and I have created for the series, and he is called the Son of the Tooth. He is able to read ghosts. He touches objects and he sees after images of where people have been and what they were feeling. And so Conan has nowhere he can hide. The Son of the Tooth is going to track him across the Hyborian Age and will not stop until he is dead. And so issue 29 is the origin of this new villain, gives you an appreciation for what empowers him, what motivates him, and how deadly he is. And then the next two issues after that are his confrontation with Conan. And it will, if we did our jobs well, it'll be one for the ages.
I know what I'm doing tomorrow. But
Yeah, I'm so pumped for people to read it. It's so fun to be able to bring new pieces into the
Mhm.
Hyborian Age and into Conan, and making a new villain is obviously a cool and big responsibility. And so we're hopeful that people will dig this character as much as we do.
Absolutely. And I'm not 100% sure when this episode will air, but just for all of those listening, issue number 29 of Conan, introducing the Son of the Tooth. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Yes, is out Wednesday, February 25th. Look for
Yeah.
it now. But if you don't mind, unfortunately, I will pivot away from Conan
No
as
worries.
much as I could actually talk to you about Conan for hours.
No problem.
Just because you brought this up by email, I have to ask, as someone who's trying to make it in comics as a writer in indie comics, I have to take this opportunity to pick your brain on comics writing. What's your
Sure.
writing process like? Like, how do you prefer to write comics? Do you vary your writing style depending on the project or collaborator?
Like most modern writers, I do full script most of the time. But on Conan in particular, there are a few artists that I work with who specifically asked me to do it what we would call plot style.
Mhm.
I would write, here are the main beats in the book, here's what's happening on the page, but I don't tell them how many panels and I don't tell them exactly how to stage it. They will then draw that page, and
Mhm.
after the art comes in, I'll dialogue it. So that's when I add the narration, the sound effects, and any talking on the page. And I found that a really cool challenge, and it's really taught me a
Mhm.
lot about that collaborative process. And now I can do both. So I'm able to go to an artist and say, what do you prefer? Or an editor and publisher, based on the project, based on your needs. Do you want me to do a full script, panel by panel breakdown? Or do you want something more broad and narrative to start? And then once we get the art, I go in and I tailor make every caption and every word balloon to make sure it's going to fit that page well. And being able to do both is just another tool in the toolkit. It allows me to be more of what a client needs and offer them more options. And that's half the trick with a creative field like comics, but any kind of creative occupation is you want to be valuable, you want to be helpful and engaging and add something to the projects that you're being a part of. That doesn't always mean that you have to be the nicest, happiest person. Like, you fight for the things that you believe are creatively important, but understand that this is a group effort and this is a collaborative thing. And everyone working on this project wants to be proud of what they do and be able to make something that they see their name on and is proud to have it. So that's why it's not just about saying, I'm the writer, here's all my ideas, I'm the top of the stack. It's every artist I get to work with. So on something like Conan, whether it's Roberto De La Torre or Doug Braithwaite, Danica Breen and Fernando Dagnino and Jonas Scharf and Ivan Gill, these are all artists that have bled on the page for me. We did a fully painted issue of Conan last year. Alex Horley spent almost a year painting panels and pages for this comic story. Whatever amount of time I spent writing it is nothing compared to what the effort that he put into issue 25 of Conan. And we are a team that did that together. And it's really special to know that you are a part of that and to make sure that you're appreciating everyone that's on the team.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you. You talked a little bit earlier about breaking into comics.
Yeah,
If you had to, what's one thing you wish more people knew about breaking in?
I'm not trying to sound pithy about this at all, but just make sure you're writing. You can never guess what the market is going to respond to. And
Mhm.
so sometimes people will try and look for trends and they'll be like, oh, this is what's hot right now. I'm going to do one of those. By the time something is trendy, your ability to pivot and write something that fits into that milieu and then be successful at it in the tailwind of whatever that thing was is almost impossible. You're usually better off just making the kinds of books that you as a reader would love, because then you're going to find the kinds of readers that love the stuff that you do. Like Skull Kickers, there were not fantasy books really on the stands very much when that came out. There certainly weren't any fantasy comedy books on the stands, and it stood out because I genuinely loved what I was doing, and Edwin and Misty and everyone that was working on the book had a lot of fun making it, and
Mhm.
that came through in every page and panel. So rather than trying to be like, is now the right time for fantasy, it was like, this is the book that I want to make and I hope you enjoy it. Rather than worrying about what the current market can bear, you've just got to make the book the best damn book you can and then hope that it finds an audience. And if it doesn't, that doesn't even mean it was a bad book or low quality or anything like that. The act of making that book is still valuable. The experiences that you had and the people you got to work with, that has its own value. You finish it as best you can, and then you move on and you make more and you keep at it. And every single one of those projects is another step forward in terms of your creative career, both in terms of learning experience and in terms of hopefully improving your quality. And that's really, there is no guaranteed success, whether that's financial or being a name that people know. The only thing you can control is the work that you're proud of and the way that you treat other people. And so if you do that, you give yourself the best chance of success. And then everything else is the market and forces and things as they lie.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know a lot of indie creators who they're really going to resonate with. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay, this is just one out of curiosity for me because I've always wondered
Sure.
about this. How do you plan and write long form ongoing series? For example, Scrouge of the Serpent, that
Right.
was a 4 issue miniseries. You're connecting 3 different time periods, 3 different iconic characters, and you have to make it all hang together. How do you
Sure.
plan something like that?
There are two major kind of mindsets for a lot of creative writing. So there, what are we call planners? So people are very tightly planning things out. And then there are pantsers. They write by the seat of their pants and try and find the story on that journey. I'm
Mhm.
definitely more of a planner, which works really well with commercial work because I can go to a client and I can say, this is the story I'm going to give you. Here's how it's going to work. And for the most part, I'm following that plan. Like spontaneously on the ground when I'm scripting something out, I might make changes or I realize something will work better or I need to make an adjustment. But for the most part, I'm literally planning it out. So if I have a 22-page issue, I do my outline. Here's what the miniseries is going to be. Here are the main events in each issue in the miniseries. Then I literally make a list of 1 to 22 for those pages. And I know every page turn what is going to be revealed, when we're changing scenes, what the most important salient information needs to come across in each scene and each page. So I've got that plan at any moment. I can look at it and wait, do we have everything we need to move forward? Is all the evidence there? Is there enough? And structurally, I can look at that list of 22 pages and I can even pick out, oh, is there enough action? If this is
Mhm.
meant to be an action-packed comic and there's only 20% of the pages even have anything cool and actiony happening, it's whoa. structurally, I need to make this more intense. And you could use that same kind of thing for any genre. If it's a romance, is there enough romance? If it's a horror, is there enough horror? Is there enough wonderment and fantasy in your whatever?
Mhm.
Look at that structurally and go, okay, this is what people came here for. If it's a Western, we need a gunfight. Is there enough gunfight and cool cowboy stuff happening in the story? I can look at it at a glance and know structurally these are setup pages, these are traveling pages, these are action pages. This is how this all kind of fits together. I'm pretty methodical about that stuff. I'm a very deep planner, and that doesn't mean it's the right way of doing it. It's just the way that works for me.
But thank you.
No problem.
Just one more on this, I promise.
Sure.
What should all aspiring comic writers read to become better writers? If you can think of one, just.
I think you gotta read beyond comics. Like you need to read a
Mhm.
lot of prose stories. You need to do a lot of research on
Mhm.
subject matters that fascinate you. You need to find more things about people, about history, about culture. Travel if you can travel. Go to places outside your own culture and life. Talk to as many people as you can. Listen just as much as you are writing because you need to gather stories and human stories and emotions and ideas and synthesize those into your work as much as possible. And so being a good listener and being open to experiences are going to make you a more well-rounded writer. They're going to make you more creative. They're going to teach you things about yourself and about the wider world that you had no way of knowing. And those will always inform your writing. So, yes, if you're into a particular genre, if you're into a particular author or character, deep dive on those things and read them fully and freely, but just get out there and do stuff, and you'll be surprised how many of those things inform other little stories and characters and moments that you're going to put into your work.
Now, I,
No
I
problem.
want to be conscious of your time. So as we move into the wrap up, what do you have coming out in the near future that you want to talk about?
As I mentioned before, I'm doing a buttload of
Mhm.
Conan. So I've got the monthly adventures of the world's most famous sword and sorcery character. And then I also have the event miniseries that'll be coming out later this year. But on Free Comic Book Day, we're going to have our Prelude issue. Make sure you check that out. I did the script rewrite on a manga translation of Journey to the West for Udon. That's also going to have a sample on Free Comic Book Day that I'm pretty excited about. I've got a two-page story in the upcoming Mad About DC. So it's the return of Mad Magazine. Chip Zdarsky is the guest editor on it, and a whole bunch of comic book superhero royalty have come out of the woodwork to do goofy ass stories in the
Mhm.
style of the classic Mad Magazine. And I got to do one. Ramon Perez and I did Spy versus Spy, which is one of the kind of
Mhm.
seminal strips in Mad, and getting to work on that. There's other stuff that hasn't been announced yet. So hopefully in the next month or two, there'll be more for me to talk about. I've got a new creator-owned book that's in development and might be out this fall. If not, then
Awesome.
definitely early next year. So lots of fun projects on the go.
That's awesome. Out of all the work you've done in comics so far, do you
Yeah.
have one particular work you're the most proud of? Is it too hard
Ah.
to call?
Yeah, I'd say the creator-owned work is in many ways the most special because even though I've done stuff on Avengers and Thunderbolts or Samurai Jack or Rick and Morty, I love those things and I love working on those things, but they would exist independent of me. And so
Mhm.
I get to be a contributor to them, but something like Skull Kickers or Wayward, Glitter Bomb or Stone Star, those are my creator owned books. And when someone comes to me and says that it's one of their favorites, that thing wouldn't exist if I didn't come up with the story and work with the art
Mhm.
team to put it together. And so there's something extra special about that when someone says, Skull Kickers is my favorite comic, or I wasn't reading comics for years and then I read Wayward and now I'm back in the comic shop every month. That feels extra special to me.
I can only imagine. Now, here on the show, you get the last word. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I've got all kinds of tutorials on there about how to write comics. I've got examples of script writing and pitches that are free that you can check out and get a feel for how this business works, collaborating with editors and artists, all kinds of fun stuff like that. And if you are excited about the possibility of making your own comics, do it. It doesn't have to be a career. It can just be a really cool hobby. And no matter what you do at whatever level you do it, making cool art and stories will make you a more well-rounded and amazing person.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zub. Thank you, Jim.
No problem.
Thanks so much.